Excellent. It's budget time. And you had a panel this morning to discuss this year's budget, which I attended. It was really interesting, some really, really good views. So obviously you are part of Frank Lab and part of the 12 participants we've got in our Frank Lab. Yeah, would you like to perhaps give us a little bit of a spiel about Gobbill and what you guys do?
Sure. Gobbill's a bill payment automation platform, which we started about 3.5 years ago. My co-founder, Quinton Marsh, and I started it in a pub, actually, of all places. And we had... Best idea right? At the MITRE, not very far from the offices here at Hall Wilcox. But we were just talking about missing bills, and bills were still being presented via email and via post. So we wanted some automation, basically, to take care of our life admin. And we started to work on it. And what we've ended up developing was something for ourselves, for our families and friends. And one thing led to another. We received investment, we've grown, we've hired a lot more people, and we've been sponsored. We've been very fortunate to be part of Frank Lab's program and the support that Hall Wilcox has provided. And we've had a lot of different community members as well join us. So being sponsored by Microsoft startup for the last 3 years. It's amazing amount of technology that we use and we need has been incredible. We've also partnered with MyProsperity and ASX listed I Signed This. And we've got Cointree as another partner as well. And so our partnerships have grown, and we've grown as a company as a result of the ecosystem here in Australia for both fintechs, regtechs, and all supporting corporations as well.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys are on a very exciting journey, and you've built quite the community, and we're very happy to be part of that community as well. Yeah, so let's talk about the budget. In terms of small businesses, because I understand that your customer base is predominantly small business, what are your thoughts on the health of small businesses of the Australian economy, and does this budget do enough to help the growth of small businesses?
Yeah, well, let's put it in context. The small businesses are hurting at the moment. We're finding that the time to payables is actually shortening, and a lot of small businesses are dipping into their reserves in order to meet their payables. And so what I did was I did a bit of a survey before budget night with a number of small businesses and to ask them how they're going. And they're basically saying, well, we've had a really subdued Christmas and New Year period. But as small business owners, they're really optimistic and they're resilient. They're saying that we think it's going to get better. We believe it's going to get better. So that's the resilience of small businesses in Australia. And there was just a small number of voices, but I think it's echoed across Australia in terms of there are pockets where small businesses are really hurting, and this budget really needed to address some fundamental issues in order to stimulate the small business community, stimulate some spending, and possibly avert more wind-ups perhaps later this year.
So in your view, you think the budget could have done a little bit more to support small businesses, perhaps?
Well, although the budget's welcomed by small businesses, and there's a lot of initiatives that are really great, like the increase in the instant asset tax write-off, and the expansion of that to businesses that are turning over 50 million. That is fantastic, but you've got to ask yourself, firstly, do they apply to high growth companies? These are really bricks and mortar companies that will benefit from it. Secondly, you have to ask yourself, how many fridges do you need to buy? The instant tax write-off has already existed. And the question is really, well, since its introduction, has the effect of it worn off, basically? So that's the second one. The third one is, can small businesses actually have the funds or borrow the funds in order to acquire those assets? Now, small business borrowings is at all-time low since 2013. And their access to credit is just getting harder and harder.
The Royal Commission wouldn't have helped.
No, absolutely not. And obviously there's a lot of people providing credit, but at what rates? So chattel mortgage for asset financing, it might not be an option for them, and servicing those debts. So they've got this issue of needing to borrow to acquire those assets. And then there was there was a point raised in this morning's panel, which was around what about the balance sheet value of that asset? Once you've written that off, it actually weakens the balance sheet, and it may prohibit that small business in getting more funding further down the track. So, or if you dispose of the asset too early, you've got a tax implication which might lead to you having to repay the tax office. So we although the initiative is fantastic, you've got to question whether there's that impact on the street to how many small businesses, and the impact to high growth type businesses as well.
So a lot of startups are saying that the budget is safe, and it doesn't sort of speak to innovation. That narrative around innovation, sadly, does not win elections from what I understand. What aspects of the budget do you think support innovation and startups?
Well, it sounded a bit silent in the innovation agenda, didn't it?
Yeah.
There was a lot that wasn't said about innovation. Now, there were a few things that were great, which was investment in women in STEM. There's also investment in the space area, aerospace. But apart from that, it was silent around the R&D tax initiatives, which Gobbill has really benefited from. Being a heavy R&D type of company, we've relied on that in order to fuel our continuing R&D. And that will really impact perhaps earlier startups than Gobbill in accessing that. We believe that it's a $1.3 billion sweat out that over a number of years based on the Tuesday night's forecast. And it's just a presumption, basically, that that's been taken out. There's also the early stage innovation company, ESIC, which we've been a beneficiary of, which allows investors, early stage investors, to attract investment into early stage companies and give them the capital gains tax-free status, which is a model which is taken from the UK, the EIS in the UK. So those things were silent in the budget, and they're good questions for us to have, which is what's happening to that.
A lot of our startups, from a Frank Labs perspective, rely on the R&D grants and rely on all these measures in order to achieve tax incentives to help them grow. But if this is being left off the agenda, so to speak, at the moment because it doesn't win votes, it is understandable how startups will be concerned, because will they have any certainty that they will be able to rely on these incentives in future? Or, it's a big question mark, isn't it?
Big question mark. And we can't live in a bubble. Even though we've got an election coming up around the corner, we can't live in a bubble. We really need leadership. We need strategy around innovation, which was discussed this morning in the panel. And we need policy in order to support that. And it's sustained investment in this area. There are a lot of countries that are competing for artificial intelligence, deep science type R&D, fintech, medtech, and it's a very, very competitive space globally. If Australia is to drop the innovation agenda, we will be left behind in terms of being able to create the next unicorns and next startups that will be exported overseas. For us at Gobbill, we're starting to look at export markets, and we're accessing a lot of the export support that's provided through government grants and government services. But what we'd like to see is something perhaps more similar to what UK has, which is an entrepreneur relief tax rate of 10%. That is incredible, because my tax rate at the moment as an entrepreneur is still way higher than 10%. We've adopted the EIS in the UK, and we've called it ESIC here, but it's not exact copy, and it lacks in terms of its generosity. So it would be great if we could see an expansion of that, the ESIC. R&D is pretty tight here in terms of the claimables and what you're actually, the way in which you approach it. I have to say, R&D has changed since research and development in pharmaceutical and medical device development. Software engineering practices are very, very different in technology, and I think there are different methods that are being employed. We can still discover, we still have uncertainty and discover new knowledge through R&D, But I think the way in which we approach R&D and support R&D can be much different. And so a relaxing of the way R&D is actually approached for the smaller end of town. Now, the larger organizations doing R&D, I think there needs to be a different sort of lens and approach. So it's not a one size fits all, but I think it's great too if we have a little bit more consideration around innovation and thought leadership.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, in terms of R&D, as you say, it's evolved so much. And I understand the criteria for applying for an R&D grant can be quite stringent. And when it comes to software development, they may not necessarily satisfy all that criteria. And so the question is, if we actually are out to support an innovation agenda, perhaps we do need to see a relaxing of those rules. Well, thank you for your time. And this was a really lovely conversation.